Welcome back. My name is Linnell Gardner. I am in charge of the estate of Sonny Liston. We are here to set the record straight. I want to start to get into the Ali Liston's fights, 1964 1965 fights. We're also going to be working with the hypothesis that Geraldine Liston stated to me before she passed away in 2005, and that is that she said that no one knew Sonny like I knew Sonny. I was always by his side. All they want to talk about are the lies. So I'm going to find out if it's true that no one knew Sonny like she knew Sonny. And what she told me after the fights, after before she died, was that if Sonny would have threw the Ali Liston fights, she didn't see any money out of it. Usually, when Sonny wins, uh, gets any extra money, he always showers her with gifts. So after the Ali Liston fights, there was no such thing. So we're gonna get through these fights step by step. I've been also working on the autopsy report, so I will definitely get back to you on that. I just want to state that there there was one thing that I wanted to clear up before Mr. Ali passed away. They were Mr. Ali and Sonny were best friends, and my grandmother called Ali Cassius Clay to the day she died, which is surprised me because Mr. Ali thought Cassius Clay was a slave name. So the fact that she uh, she called him Cassius Clay meant that it must be true that Sonny and Ali were friends. She also said that the pre-fight banter that they were going back and forth with before the fights, that she said that was just propaganda. They were best friends. So I didn't believe it until I was on my way to see my father, who was staying with my grandmother Geraldine in St. Louis before he passed, and she had told me over the phone that yes, about this story about Ali and Sonny being best friends, and actually they're the only uh, competitors who have had the same sports agent. Usually, historically, when two competitors have been competing all their lives, it's hard for them to have the same agent, um, because they can't get over that competitive uh, streak they have between them. Uh, One example of that is Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. Uh, Joe Frazier wanted to have the same agent as Mr. Ali, and because of Mr. Ali's banter during the Thriller in Manila days, and calling Mr. Ali calling Mr. Frazier ugly and a monkey. I mean that he never got over that. So they were never able to have the same agent. But Sonny and Ollie were able to. So that goes to show you that how strong their relationship was. And the funny thing about that is that when I was on my way to see my grandmother and my dad, which I didn't know was going to be the last time, they both died 3 weeks apart in the same month. Uh, on my way to see her in St. Louis, I flew from California and I stopped in O'Hare, and it was very late at night, and I um, I think I was the only one. At least I thought I was the only one in the airport. So I was bored, and I started walking around the airport. In a closed part of the airport, I see this man coming towards me in the opposite direction, and as he got closer, this is on my way to see my grandmother after getting a phone, talking to her over the phone before I left about Mr. Ali and the relationship he had with Sonny. And as he got as the man got closer, it was just me and this gentleman in the airport at that late at night, and it ended up being Mr. Muhammad Ali, who was walking right towards me, and I said, "Let me see if my grandmother was correct when it comes to this relationship Sonny was supposedly had with Mr. Ali." So I said, "Hey," I went up to him. I said, "Listen, I'm Geraldine Liston's grandson, and she I just said wants to say hello. She said hello, and how you doing? How's everything?" And he pulled out he pulled out a pamphlet. It was a pamphlet for the Nation of Islam. He was still a practicing member, and he wrote a note to Geraldine and asked me to give it to her when I saw her in St. Louis. When I arrived in St. Louis, um, so it was it was it was interesting to see that what she said was true. They were close, and he gave me a hug. He hugged me, as we were leaving, and I was really taken aback by his broad shoulders, amazingly broad shoulders, and his height. I think he's 6'2" or 6'1", something like that, and I'm 5'10" and a half. And I didn't know much about Parkinson's, but um, I thought it affected the brain, but it's the nervous system. And I found out later, and because he was sharp as a tack. I mean, he understood everything I said, and he remembered Geraldine and Sonny, and so so when I arrived in, we said our goodbyes, and again we hugged, and when first thing I did when my grandmother opened up the door, and when I arrived in St. Louis, was give her the note that Mr. Ali had given her, um, that he wrote for her. So we're dealing with that premise, and that's the premise I'm going to be going with as we move along in this process. The premise that no one knew Sonny like I knew Sonny. I was always by his side. All they want to talk about are the lies. So far, no one in the last 15 years now that I've been working on this has been more accurate than my grandmother. I mean, no one, not movie stars, um, not athletes, not sports writers, not movie makers, not people, news agencies. No one on the globe. Uh, I have yet to meet anyone that knows as much as she did about Sonny. And now we're gonna and what I wanted us to realize is there is a lot of there's a lot of misinformation about Sonny Liston that has become more of a cottage industry. You have the truth and you have the reality. You have the myth and you have the truth. And a lot of that has to do with selling news and selling movies, and when it bleeds it leads, and just how the news works. There's a lot of sensationalism, a lot of yellow kids. They used to call them yellow kids that sensationalized the news. And you had the Walter Annenberg, Philadelphia Inquirer, who had put Sonny on his blacklist. uh, he didn't think he deserved. He didn't think Walter Annenberg didn't think that Sonny deserved publicity, and that might be the reason why Sonny did not get any publicity for after he beat Floyd Patterson, uh, because the Philadelphia Inquirer didn't give him any press. So that could be a good reason why there was no one at the airport after he beat to greet him at the airport after he had beaten. Uh, Floyd Patterson. So a lot of it is not just Sonny. A lot of it is the media. There was a lot of the media that was against him, and a lot of the uh, a lot of newspaper reporters that were loyal to Sonny are still. I mean, excuse me, that were loyal to Walter Annenberg and the Philadelphia Inquirer, who were known to have yellow kids, yellow journalists meaning those that sensationalize the news, working for him. And those same, like, for give you an example, Larry Merchant. He was one of the yellow kids who was very appreciative of Walter Annenberg for giving him a job, because at the time there was a lot of anti-Semitism against Jews, and Larry Merchant. I mean, he that's not his real surname. He has a Jewish surname. Uh, he changed his name to protect his to hide his Jewish identity. Uh, and he was, he's one of the yellow kids that was that understood that Sonny was part of this, on this blacklist, this Annenberg blacklist. And so, as if you watch, all you need to do is check the reporters that were on the payroll of Walter Annenberg, and then watch through the years, um, their messaging when it came to Sonny Liston. It was very, very negative, and a lot of those same reporters, um, uh, are actually partly responsible for creating this myth about Sonny Liston, uh, that you'll see in these documentaries in from the past, and even in uh, this present Showtime special. A lot of them are connected to Philadelphia news agencies that were known for yellow journalism. So you're dealing with a lot of false information, and there's a reason why a lot of the news and movies and publications were anti Sunny, that were very negative towards Sonny Liston, and it had a lot to do with the blacklist. Sonny being on this blacklist with Annenberg. Annenberg had a lot of power. His newspaper company, Philadelphia Inquirer, was was one of the biggest in the country, uh, if not the world at the time. So he had a lot of influence on his reporters, and even after Annenberg died, again, these same reporters are still, some of them to this day are still writing negative stories about Sonny Liston. That is partly the reason why people have this negative outlook on Sonny. They're partly responsible for creating that. So let's look up the definition of sensationalism. Sensationalism is a type of editorial bias in mass media in which events and topics in news stories and pieces are overhyped to increase viewership or readership numbers. Some tactics include being deliberately obtuse, appealing to emotions, being controversial, intentionally omitting facts and information, being loud, self centered, and acting to obtain attention. So let's take that into consideration, and let's look at some of the news headlines pertaining to Sunny. So think about what we just said about sensationalism, and think about these titles when they were telling stories. These headlines when they were telling stories about Sunny. And here's a few of them. These are news. These are headlines about Sonny. He has no business in boxing. This is a savage. He shouldn't be fought. He should be hunted. Now, here's another one. The face that doesn't fit. The man who never came out of solitary. Sonny Liston, king of the beast. Sonny Liston had a left jab from hell. He could be. He could put it through walls, knock down buildings. Liston seemed to have strayed out of a horror movie. The man who never came out of solitary. That's quite. That's just. That's one example. Just a few examples of sensationalism in print. So we're going to get into the fights. Ali 1964, 1965 fights. And there's a lot of things that Geraldine told me about the fights that most people in the general public do not know. Um, and one of the things about Sonny is that the 1964 fight, people want to know why he didn't use his jabs as much as he should have. And we're going to get into that in our next episode. But what I want to get into now is the death of Mr. Muhammad Ali. Now, Mr. Muhammad Ali, what I wanted to do is I wanted to redeem his name around the fights because people think that the fights were fixed, and there's this quote unquote mystery that they talk about in the Showtime special Pariah: The Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston. Again, if there's no mystery, there was no mystery while Geraldine Liston was still alive, because no one knew Sonny like she knew Sonny. But everybody wants to be an expert on Sonny Liston because there's a lot of money saying that you have the skinny on Sonny. But the most important thing I wanted to do was try because I knew Mr. Ali was close to passing before the general public. So I wanted to find a way to get the FBI to release. They already released had released the FBI file on